In today's video, we're going to be going over a few acronyms that I see on a fairly regular basis as a software developer. Now, you may or may not know most of these or any of them, but let's get started at the top. So, PO. This one I see less common. Most people just say the actual words, but product owner. So, your product owner is the person in the business side, usually, who owns the app. And not necessarily from a business perspective, or an ownership perspective, but they are in charge of the app, its outcomes, what it's supposed to be, that kind of thing. PM is the project manager. Usually on the IT side, that person exists. They coordinate with the PO, the product owner, to create the requirements and kind of manage the project. Really, it's kind of a circular thing there, but their job is to manage the project for the PO. BA is a business analyst. Every team and every company does them a little bit differently, but in general, their job is to act as the go-between between the business side and the development side. So, for example, let's say the product owner says, "Okay, I want a scheduling tool now." The BA will be meeting with them, sometimes with the PM, to go over what it should look like. What are the requirements? Should the scheduling tool have a calendar function? They'll go through. They try to work out the details of what the business actually wants, and then they usually sometimes will create stories, user stories, and work items for the software team to work on. They kind of break it into manageable chunks or help do that. QA is your quality assurance, usually a separate team, depending on the size of your organization, could be an entirely separate team. Uh, Quality assurance people, what they will do is run your tools, run your app, your software, look for bugs. So, like I said, continuing that scheduling example, let's say you've got your scheduling tool. What the QA person will do is open up your app, try to use it, try to break it. They'll go through as many situations as they can think of that a user would do, even some weird ones. Like, let's just say you forgot to include some null protection on your app. Well, they'll try to test that, and if they can break it, then they'll log a bug for you to fix. DBA is a database administrator. Again, that could be you as a software developer, or that could be really anyone. It could be an actual person, or it could be you, could be a third party. Yeah, it could be anyone. But your database administrator is the person who will usually handle the majority of your database operations. So let's just say you need some table changes. You as a developer may or may not do that. If you've got a DBA, generally they handle a lot of the more complicated stuff like upgrading the database software and that sort of thing. Um, so let's see, MVP is your minimum viable product. You'll hear this one a lot in agile organizations. So in general, for MVP, what we're aiming for is um, the minimum viable product. So let's just say it's functional, it looks okay, that's good enough. If you hit the key functions, that's your MVP. And the idea is you get the MVP out as fast as possible and you go on and fix the rest of it later and you get the rest of it done at a future time after you release the MVP. UI or GUI or GUI, depending on how you want to say it, is the user interface or graphical user interface. That is the connection between your software, the backend, and your user. In general, it kind of looks like things like these buttons here on Microsoft Word. This is a GUI here. See, I can select different things. That is the GUI because it allows me, the user, to interact with the software. UX is your user experience. Slightly different than UI. So UI is things like your buttons. UX determines, should it be a button? Should it be a hyperlink? What is the user experience here? What does the user expect it to do? That's that person's job. If it's an actual person, sometimes it's you, the software developer, who has to think about UX. Um, CDN is your content delivery network. Not every company uses them, but larger companies will use a content delivery network to speed up times. So for example, if your website does a lot of downloading or you want it to load hyper fast, what you'll do is either create your own CDN or use somebody else's CDN. So you have servers around the world, much closer to your users, and that caches your website and hosts it, and that will greatly decrease your loading times. TDD is a style of development, test-driven development. Basically, you write the test first based on the acceptance criteria, and yeah, based on your requirements, you write tests. So let's say one of your requirements is that your scheduling tool should be able to successfully create a calendar event. Well, you would write a test for that it successfully creates the calendar event first, and then after you do that, then you write the code. So then you can test against it, and once the test starts passing, then you know you're done, or much closer to being done. UAT is a stage of testing. It's user acceptance testing. Basically, this is when you take a select group of end users, usually determined by the business people. They will determine who is part of UAT. Uh, Basically, they get the update a little bit earlier than everyone else. They test it. Once they say, yep, it's all good to go, we like the features, everything works fine, then you're good to go. Uh, SIT, or SIT, is systems integration testing. Systems integration testing is when so let's say you're making a web app and it has to connect with a microservice on the back end and another microservice somewhere else. Basically, you make sure that your web app or your software can connect with the other services that it's supposed to. You're testing that its integration is successful. Uh, WYSIWYG is how I usually say this, is what you see is what you get. Microsoft Word is probably one of the most famous ones. So you can see all my text on the screen here. And if I were to print this out, what you see is what you get. It would look exactly like this. And that's one of the most famous WYSIWYG products out there. AD, you see this one a little less often unless you're working with Windows. It's more of a sysadmin kind of acronym, but it's Active Directory, and that's the Microsoft proprietary permissions tool. It's used by a lot of large O365 based organizations. UUID, I use this one somewhat frequently. It's a universally unique identifier. Basically, you use a library to create a UUID when you need something that will always be unique no matter what. There's no collisions. Yeah, so that's a universally unique identifier. VCS, version control system. One of the most famous ones is Git. Basically, it is just what holds your code, um, lets you version on it. So let's just say I were to modify this and say I want it to say something else, modify the text here. Uh, Git would recognize the change, commit it as a change, and then I could always roll back if I want to. But yeah, version control system, there's a lot of them out there, but Git is the most popular. ETL, I do less of this myself. It's extract, transform, load. That is basically extract data, transform the data, load the data. It's basically all about data and what do you want it to do. OOP, object-oriented programming. So famous languages Java, C Sharp, a few others. But those are the more famous object-oriented languages. But basically the idea is you create reusable components or reusable objects that you can keep using over and over again in your code. For example, if you are trying to make a lot of web service calls and let's say your users need to have a proxy enabled, you would maybe write a proxy type service or a proxy service of some kind that would automatically configure the proxy on every web service call in your class. That way you're not writing that code constantly again and again and again everywhere you need to make the call. CRUD, create, read, update, delete, or destroy, depending on who you ask. Basically, it's just the acronym for basic web API. You can create data, you can read data, you can update data, or you can delete data. That's all it really is. IDE, the last one here, is Integrated Development Environment. Basically, instead of just using a text editor to edit your code and using command line to compile it, an IDE is something like PyCharm or IntelliJ, which is my favorite. Basically, it includes your compilers all in there, text highlighting, um, all kinds of other tools to help you develop better and faster. Anyway, that's all we have for you today. It's just a list of some common development acronyms that I see on a fairly regular basis. Thanks for watching.